Thanks for joining us. We at First Presbyterian practice what we call a spacious Christianity, where we remind each other of our essential goodness, because it's so easy to forget that in this world, where all are welcome and diversity is celebrated, where doubts and questions are a gift that lead us into deeper conversations, where vulnerability is a strength and your tears are holy, where we encourage each other to live the spacious and radical love of Jesus so that all might have a chance to flourish in this world. It is our hope that here you will find space to breathe, a faith to believe in, and a God who believes in you. Welcome.
Blessed be your name in the land that is plentiful, where streams of abundance flow. Blessed be your name. Blessed be your name when I'm found in the desert place, though I walk through the wilderness. Blessed be your name. Every blessing you pour out, I'll turn back to praise. When the darkness closes in, Lord, still I will say, blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your glorious name. Blessed be your name when the sun's shining down on me, when the world's all as it should be. Blessed be your name. Blessed be your name on the road marked with suffering, but there's pain in the offering. Blessed be your name. Every blessing you pour out, I'll turn back to praise. When the darkness closes in, Lord, still I will say, blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your glorious name. You give and we receive. You give and we receive. My heart will choose to say, Lord, blessed be your way. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your glorious name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your glorious name.
God of holy surprises, infuse us with your wild wonder. Attune our hearts to all the ways you dance through the world, from the ordinary to the sublime. Sustain us in the daily practice of opening our eyes to grace. Expand our imaginations to see more deeply and more widely than before. Align us with all the ways you are at work, always extending a new vision when all seems shut down. Help us to experience the eruption of seeds in springtime and that abundant growth as a sign of your generous love. Inspire us to begin again and again.
In her book, An Altar in the World, Episcopal priest and author Barbara Brown Taylor writes, "Whoever you are human. Wherever you are, you live in the world, which is just waiting for you to notice the holiness in it." When was the last time you noticed something that felt holy or sacred? Now, first, you might immediately think of religious spaces, right? We call a church sanctuary or a cathedral sacred. We might call a vigil or service or prayer sacred. We have sacred texts and sacred stories and sacred songs. We have the bread and the wine, ordinary things made sacred. I like to call my cup of coffee in the morning before my kids wake up sacred. I wonder what is sacred in your life. I have a feeling that we might say some of the same things and some different things too, and we would both be right. I want to briefly share two stories we find in the Bible where individuals seem to stumble upon a holy or sacred space. The first one is fairly well known. We find it in Exodus when Moses encounters a burning bush in the desert. Now, the cliff notes on Moses. He was a Hebrew who was raised as the son of Pharaoh's daughter in Egypt. And one day as an adult, he comes across an Egyptian worker beating a Hebrew slave. He intervenes, murdering the Egyptian. So he hightails it out of there. He flees to the desert where he ends up marrying a Midianite woman and settling down into a fairly ordinary life as a shepherd. Now, by the time this whole burning bush ordeal happens, he's lived here in the desert for another 40 years, spending his time tending to sheep, roaming the land. At this point, he knows the terrain well, and I find it hard to imagine that much surprises him about it. But one day he encounters this burning bush. And it's interesting in the story, Moses doesn't seem as concerned about the fact that the bush is burning. His attention is piqued because the bush is not being consumed by the blaze. But more interesting to me is that he stops and he pays attention. And in that space, he hears a voice that says, "Take off your sandals, for you are standing on holy ground." A voice that tells Moses, God, the presence of love, is in his midst. Moses immediately obeys. And the question I ask when I read this is, was there something inherently special or holy about that specific patch of ground? Did it have anything to do with the burning bush, or was it the presence of God in that place at that time that somehow made that space holy, sacred? And where does God's presence exist, and how do we experience that? I think of the psalmist who seemed to feel that God's presence was inescapable, writing, "Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there." And if God is everywhere, then is not all ground holy? The next story I want to share takes place just days after Jesus' death. There are two men, followers of Jesus, who are traveling the road from Jerusalem to Emmaus. And they're talking about all the events that have taken place over the past several days about Jesus' death and now his supposed resurrection, when a fellow traveler on the road overhears their discussion and joins them, saying, "What are you talking about? What is all this that you're saying has happened?" Now, we know from the text that this man was actually Jesus playing dumb, and these two men didn't seem to recognize him. Not until they make it to their destination and extend hospitality to the man, asking him to join them for a meal. Up to this point, it was just an ordinary walk, an ordinary conversation, an ordinary gesture of hospitality, and they're about to share an ordinary meal. But when they see Jesus break the bread, which is something his followers saw him do often, then they suddenly realized who they had been with the whole time. All of a sudden, it all becomes so sacred. But the road they were walking on was already sacred the whole time. Jesus was already in their midst. They just weren't aware. And I wonder about that. I wonder about the ways in which we, distracted ironically by the very things of life, miss out on the holy and sacred right in front of us. Lately, I've been finding myself unintentionally reading and learning from authors who are dying. They all seem to have been diagnosed with various terminal illnesses, a best if used by date placed suddenly on their lives. And as I say that out loud, I realize we all really have the same diagnosis, the human condition. There's a final breath in store for all of us one day. But it seems like those who are given a sentence of X amount of weeks or months or years, those who really feel the struggle of being alive, fully alive, they have a wisdom and understanding that, on the one hand, I don't want to be prescribed, yet I can't help but think how ironic it is that those who seem to understand the sacredness of life the most, perhaps especially in the ordinary things that you and I take for granted every day, they're the ones who fully acknowledge what it might mean to die. So one of these authors I recently listened to on a podcast, We Can Do Hard Things, is poet Andrea Gibson. And if you haven't listened to their work or shared it with the young people in your lives, go and do that immediately, please. This is your spiritual practice for the week. No, but in this podcast, they had so many painfully beautiful things to say about their experience since their diagnosis, their wounds, how they saw God in it all, how they understood who God might be at all. Gibson talks about the surprising healing that they have encountered. Surprising because they're going through something that there is no cure for. Chronic Lyme disease as well as ovarian cancer, which recently they're experiencing a recurrence of, things very much out of their control. But one of the things that Gibson says that struck me was the only thing we have control over in this life is where we put our attention. Where do you put your attention? What is sacred? Is God here or only up there? And what is this ground beneath our feet? And if God is present everywhere, then isn't all ground holy? And aren't you and I also animated dirt? Are we not made of the very same stuff? Maybe you remember Marie Kondo's book and later television show, The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up. It's this philosophy or method of curating your physical space to promote your well-being, to only own items that truly spark joy. And part of the process is that you physically pick up every item in your household. Let's say you're going through clothing, and you don't ask yourself if you need it or you still use it, if you wear it, but you hold it. You feel it. You pay attention to it, and you pay attention to how it makes you feel, and you ask yourself, does this spark joy? And now I'm not going to say anything for or against this method. I think there is value in considering what we give a physical place to in our lives. But the thing that I do appreciate about this method, Marie Kondo is asking us to enter into a practice of stopping and paying attention to the ordinary, everyday things around us. And not only is she asking us to pay attention, but also considering what it is in our life that we truly value, that we consider important, perhaps even what we would call sacred. Now, paying attention is interesting to me on a whole nother level that I promise I won't nerd out on too much right now. But some of you are probably familiar with the problem of measurability as defined through the studies of quantum physics, right? I'll only touch on this briefly because it is a rabbit hole and really no one has the answers, and I definitely don't have them. But the basic idea is that through experiments studying the behavior of photons, scientists have discovered that mere observation seems to influence how matter behaves. It's this strange phenomenon where the moment a photon is observed in a particular way that would actually show us what's happening, it suddenly acts in very different ways than when it's not observed that way. And it just makes me think that even on this very micromolecular level, what we pay attention to matters. How we pay attention matters. This burning bush in our life, this dusty road we were walking, this conversation with this stranger, the small, almost invisible ways we each influence the world around us every day. And then I think, when we look at the life of Jesus, this is another person we learn from who perhaps wasn't diagnosed with a terminal illness, but has accepted the truth of his death. He knew his days were numbered. He understood something about the finitude of life. He had this human experience, lived the human condition like us too. And what did he pay attention to? He paid attention to the people around him. He felt deeply moved with compassion, and he did something positive with that feeling. He looked and noticed the ones on the margins. He noticed the injustices. He took ordinary moments and made them sacred, a meal around a table, for instance. And he called out the religious for the things they liked to put on pedestals and holy pillars, pointed out the ways they were royally missing the point. So what does this have to do with us? What does it mean to find the sacred in the ordinary, in ourselves, in the eyes of another, in the packing of lunches and signing of permission slips and finding of missing socks, in the quiet, lonely mornings in an empty house, in the day job, and in the caretaking of those we love, or perhaps even accepting caretaking from someone else? How can we walk through our days considering that perhaps even the very offering we give to the world creates holy ground? What if God isn't just up on some mountaintop or in some holy cathedral or in a burning bush in the desert, but right here, as we do the dishes and take out the trash or sit with our friend in grief or get up for the 4th or 5th time in the middle of the night to soothe a crying babe? What if we ourselves, of the dirt, inspired and animated, breathing and living, are of the very same stuff? And how do we get this right? Because the world is aching. There are wounds everywhere. And sometimes it feels like too much to ask to pay attention to it all. Of course it is. I don't know that our nervous systems were meant for all the global pain that we are exposed to on a day-by-day, sometimes minute-by-minute basis. But what about the here and now? What about the things we can control? What about where we put our attention? Going back to this conversation I listened to with Andrea Gibson, at one point they were asked what they think about good and bad in the world. Are there good and bad people? And they respond that they think when you see that person cursing out a cashier or inflicting pain on someone in some way, they don't see a bad person, but they do see a wounded person. And how there is no stronger weapon than our wounds, and the world is really, really wounded. And then they go on to say, the definition for myself for a long time is, are you trying? Are you trying to be kind? Are you trying to be generous? Are you trying to make the world more beautiful? Are you trying to care for yourself and those around you? And I say trying because I have experiences of times in my life where I tried to be kind and I couldn't be. Anyone else? When we think about Moses, for instance, this holy patriarch of the Bible, was he good or bad? He murdered someone. He freed a whole lot of slaves. He made mistakes just like all of us, and he kept trying, it seems. But maybe the question isn't whether a person is good or bad. Maybe it isn't a question at all. Maybe it's just that we're all human, and that in and of itself is sacred. And the thing I find compelling about all of this as I think about it is not only the ways in which simple human observation, paying attention, noticing what is right where we are seems to influence the world around us, even as suggested by quantum physics, but more so, how it changes us. Because what we call sacred becomes just that in our eyes. I mean, we start wars over this stuff. But what does it do to me and to you to remember not only is it sacred to sit amongst those we love and know, but also to find the sacred in the eyes of the person that we can barely stand to look at? What does it mean to remember that even when my wounds are bleeding out and obvious, I am still sacred, whole? What does it mean to take each moment, the only moment we are really promised, and realize in the hard and the good, in the effortless and the challenge, in the highs and lows, the deep despair and ecstatic joy, in the brokenness and everything in between, this life, this human experience is sacred. Barbara Brown Taylor writes, "What is saving my life now is becoming more fully human, trusting that there is no way to God apart from real life in the real world." We are walking on holy ground, friends. Pay attention to the sacred ordinary and see how it changes the world around you. See how it changes you. Peace.
Just beyond my sight, something that I cannot see. I've been circling round a thought that's been circling round me, like the vapor of a song that is just out of earshot. I thought I knew the question, but I guess not. There it is, just below the surface of things, in a flash of blue and the turning of wings. I drain the glass, drink it down, every moment of this, every little bit of it. I swam against the tide, I tripped on my own pride, so I'll try again today to get out of my own way. The face was always in the stone, said Michelangelo. You just have to chip and clear to see what's already there. There it is, just below the surface of things, in a flash of blue and the turning of wings. I drain the glass, I drink it down, every moment of this, every little bit of it. There it is in the apple of every new notion. There it is in the scar healed over what was broken, in the branches, in the whispering, in the silence and the sighs, and the curious promise of limited time. It's true, although it's hard, a shadow glides over the ridge, and one fast beating heart tries with all its might to live, and we sense but can't describe from the corner of our eye something nameless and abiding, and so we keep transcribing. There it is, just below the surface of things, in a flash of blue and the turning of wings. I drain the glass, I drink it down, every moment of this, every little bit of it. Every little bit. Every little bit of it. Every little bit.
Friends, we are walking on holy ground. The presence of love exists in our very heartbeat, in the everyday places we find ourselves, in the eyes of those in our midst. I want to offer as a blessing a poem I wrote years ago titled Creating Holy Ground. It goes, "Don't forget this remarkable truth. We each have a miraculous opportunity to walk through this world imprinting peace with every gentle and unhurried step." Peace to you.
Thanks for joining us today. We really hope that you found space to breathe, a faith you can believe in, and a God who believes in you. Visit us at bendfp.org. There you can get more information on who we are and what we're about. You can learn about how we're trying to make a difference in this world, and how you can partner with us and support us financially, or you can make a prayer request. Until next time, may God bless you, and may you be the blessing someone else needs.
Blessed assurance, Jesus is mine. Oh, what a foretaste of glory divine, heir of salvation, purchase of God, born of the Spirit, washed in God's love. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. Perfect submission, all is at rest. I in my Savior am happy and blessed, watching and waiting, looking above, filled with God's goodness and lost in God's love. This is my story.